really great introduction. Thank you for that. So yeah, we've been at this for quite a while. Odvod was initially established in 1999, and I've published magazines for, I'm going to say all of my life because I published my first one in grade three. And then, of course, as an adult, they got better. And we really got serious about it in 2006 when we started publishing Avenue Edmonton. And it's kind of my, I guess you'd say it's my passion. I love magazines. I read them, I subscribe, and now I publish several of them. So thank you for having me and us, the Oddvod team. We really like the work that we do for your group, and we think it's important work. Telling the stories of our province. I'm going to turn my phone off. Sorry, that's my landline. Um, so a couple notes is I attended a lot of webinars as well, and I really dislike it when I get to that webinar and it's a disguised sales pitch. That is not what this is. Anita is here and there will be opportunity to ask questions, but that's not what I'm going to be talking about. I'm not just trying to convince you to do something. And the other thing I don't like is when I could have looked up on the internet in about 5 minutes the information that I got from the webinar. So I'm going to make sure that I've got like lots of information for you, and it's not just the what or the how, but it's the why. And I often say when I do these kinds of things that I think there's a license plate somewhere that says, get in, hold on, and I think it's a rude phrase for being quiet. You are muted, so you will be quiet, but I'm going to ask you to get in and hold on because I'm going to give you as much as I can. And I've been doing this, well, really all of my life, and certainly professionally in marketing communications for all of my career. So I have a lot to say, and I want to give you as much as I possibly can. So one of the things I want to do is tell you that I have a phrase that I've used and based my company on, and really it is the basis of how I live my life, and that is the art of communication is the language of leadership. And James Humes was a presidential speechwriter. A long time ago, he wrote from, I think it was Eisenhower through Reagan. And I really believe this is true, that when you can communicate clearly, when you can express your ideas, you can provide leadership to people. They will follow you because leadership is something that people crave. And so if you've got really good communication materials in whatever it is you do, or if you're just a good communicator, it can really help. And so I think one of the things that we do as magazine publishers is try to help people communicate better. And I'm going to tell you that there's sort of three things that you need to look at when you're communicating. And the one is it's clear communication, needs to be clear, consistent. And I know that this is something that we fall down on a lot, and I see it in the consumer magazines that we publish where someone will do a really great ad and be creative ad, and they run it a couple times, and they're like, well, we need to change it. And I say, no, no, you don't. Please don't change it. We need consistent messaging. And then the last one is constant. And that also can be tiring because you think, isn't everybody sick and tired of listening to me say that? Well, no, they're not. And I don't have this stat in front of me because I only heard it a few weeks ago and I just need to do a bit of research on it. But it used to be, and if you've in marketing for a while, you'll know that it used to be that people needed to hear 7 touch points or have 7 touch points to hear your message properly or remember it. Now it's something like 22. And I'm going to do some work on that because I do think it's true, but I want to make sure that I have my facts straight. Obviously, we fact check everything. That's what journalists do. But isn't that amazing that it takes so much more? And I think it's connected to the fact that we don't remember what we see in digital as much as we remember when it's tactile, when we hold it in our hands. So there's some research happening with Alberta Magazine Publishers Association around this, of which I'm a member and a board member. And I'm going to share that with EDA membership when I get that all pulled together, because I think it's good information for you to have as you plan how you're going to communicate what and how and why you do what you do. So today we were asked to talk about from from print to promotion, and kind of making the most of your investment in Invest in Alberta, or Experience Alberta magazine. And that's not just, signing the contract to get your ad and your advertorial. There is so much more to this. And that's what I'm going to try and talk about today, and just kind of jam pack it all in. And I do talk at a fairly fast pace, but I hope that you can understand me. And as Nancy said, she's going to send out the recording to you. So today we're going to take a deep dive into a few things. So one is the credibility of a magazine to support your place brand. And I'll get into a little bit of what that means. And of course, your economic development that is connected to that. It really is about leveraging what we would call your paid, owned, shared, and earned media. And I will explain what that is and how those things connect. And then we're going to give you some ideas and some practical information about how to do it. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about. And we're keeping it under an hour because I know a lot of you are on your lunch break. So let's start with why magazines. Well, magazines have targeted audiences, and the distribution method doesn't matter. I'll talk about what the distribution method is for Invest in Alberta, Xperience Alberta. But typically, one of the reasons why magazines are so credible and have outlasted so many other forms of print media is because of the targeted audience. And whether it's subscribed, or like in our case for Edify Edmonton, that one is picked up by choice on over 400 key stands throughout the capital region, and they all go, like 100% of them go. So people don't pick up a magazine from a stand like that and not read it. And that's also true of the distribution method for Invest in Alberta, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. The other reason why magazines are great is because of their editorial integrity. It leads to trust. And one of the things that magazines do, because of the amount of effort that goes into it mostly, is that it's journalism. It's creative nonfiction is a way to think about that. So it's narrative that is interesting to read. It's not a report. It's interesting to read because it's story-based, but it's truthful. And that's another reason why magazines and why they're so powerful. So it also establishes credibility. Nowadays, especially digital, you don't really know where that information is coming from. But if it appears in a magazine, there's credibility attached to that. And that some of that credibility is, there's this old phrase, you might have heard this, and I think it's Mark Twain that it's attributed to, but I've also heard it attributed to Will Rogers. It's this notion that an expert is someone who comes from at least 50 kilometers away and carries a briefcase. I mean, sometimes there's jokes about consultants about that very thing, that sometimes you have an internal person who knows just as much, but if you bring someone in to do a seminar or a webinar, that there's somehow more credibility attached to that. There's something about magazines that establishes credibility, and certainly it's based on a couple of things like editorial integrity and how well written they are and that sort of thing. But it does establish that credibility. And I'll tell you a quick story. The other thing that establishes credibility is television. And I've hung out with media people for most of my life and have a couple of friends who are news anchors. So they're very, like, people recognize them. We're out for lunch or we're out for the evening. People know who they are. And we've talked about this, about how television is that other thing that establishes credibility, because I've watched this happen where the news anchors actually said to me, I'm really just the hair and teeth. I really just read the news. I don't write it. I actually don't research it. I don't know that much about it. I'm just really good being on TV. But there's this credibility attached to that news anchor. So you can kind of draw your own conclusions here, but magazines are credible. And then the other thing is the longevity or stickiness. And I do get involved in some research that it comes out of the United States, and it comes from the US because we don't have a big enough population to get good verified statistics. But there's a statistic that I just adore around the longevity or stickiness of magazines. And that is that 30% of them are never, ever thrown out. So maybe that's your house. I know I have magazines that date back a long, long time as well. They're kind of my favorites. And so it's not unusual for magazines to stick around and have that shelf life or that stickiness for quite a while. Okay, so I'm going to look, I want to look, I talked about how we talk about the distribution of this. So in general, when we prepare the distribution plan in consultation with the people at EDA, we look at doing it this way. So it's about 12,000 copies, business leaders and executives, and that's both nationally and internationally. About 1,200 copies to EDA members and, some of the events that they'd be at and that sort of thing, and in-office distribution. We send 1,000 copies to kind of consulates and trade offices and these related organizations across Canada and globally. And then there's about 800 copies that end up kind of with affiliate organizations in Alberta. And we often get asked about this right about now when you're thinking about booking and you're trying to figure out if this is what you want to do and you want to confirm the distribution. I actually want to tell you that we don't confirm it until right before press date, and there's a reason for that. World events affect the decisions that we make about this, and we want it to be relevant in the moment. So we go to press late December, it starts to be available in January, and we want it to be going to the right places at exactly the right time. We also look at the editorial. So as you know, there's work that goes on between EDA and ourselves regarding and our editorial team about what stories we're actually going to dig into and what that editorial is going to be about. And we want to make sure that we are considering the editorial when we consider where those magazines are going to go in that year. So like a good example was, I think it was last year, we did some work around data centers. And so we made sure that those magazines went to businesses or areas, mostly in Europe. They're doing a lot of work in that particular category of business. So this is very intentional for us, and it's looked at in detail right before we go to press. Let's look at the value of magazines now. So this is a stat. You can see the source there. It's new from 2024. The value of magazines is that nearly 80% of people who see an ad or see something in a magazine, it could be the editorial as well, will take action. And that is, they don't necessarily just go out and do what you're telling them to do, but they will often, they say in this survey that they take a step connected to what they read. So sometimes they're visiting the website of the advertiser, they're doing other research about that topic, the ad topic, or it could be the editorial as well. And we find that it's a determinant of a favorable opinion. So a determinant is a determining factor of a favorable opinion. So this goes back to my news anchor story. The woman that I hang out with and have lunch with every once in a while. And she thinks it's kind of funny that people think she knows all about world events because she reports them on camera. So they have a favorable opinion about what she knows and thinks. But in fact, it like she kind of laughs about it. Yes, she's interested. She does the news, but she's not the expert, really. She's conveying the information. This is also true of magazines in that the expert is really the people that we're writing about, but the magazine ends up having the favorable opinion of being the source to go to. And that is the value of being in a magazine. So one of the things I want to talk about is the actual Invest in Alberta, Xperience Alberta as a tool. Now, how we think about this is kind of the customer journey. And, the good old days are gone of transaction. Just we send something out, we get something back. There's a journey to this, and it really doesn't matter whether you're trying to convince someone to come for the summer to your destination and experience something touristy, because you do something great in northern Alberta, or whether you've got a research project happening in southern Alberta. or you're building something in central Alberta, your customer or the person who's interested in engaging goes through the same thing. So there's an awareness that leads to the findability, that leads to the reputation, that leads to conversation, and then the experience. So if you look at it from the customer point of view, they have an interest, they do some searching, maybe some researching, they engage, and they become the advocate. And this cycle of dealing with someone in your industry is the way it works for everybody. Sometimes it happens in a day because they're booking 2 weeks at your camp and you're going to do something really cool with them. Or maybe they're building a $1 billion project. It's actually the same process. It just takes longer or shorter. So when you invest in the magazine, you can use this as a tool throughout that entire journey. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But the power of your magazine message is really about your brand and your unique proposition. It's about your story. And I wanted to talk a little bit about brand really briefly because I think it's helpful. And this is really the history of brand. And we've worked a lot in that area. And when I condense it down into this, I think it's really helpful for you to consider what your place brand is or what the brand of your product or service is, and see where you're hitting here and if you're feeling good about it. So it started actually with where it came from. And that is like back in ancient days, there was a pottery essentially found in Pompeii, and the name of the potter was on there, the name of the maker. So essentially it was about where it came from, the beginning of the story, if you will. Then brand over time has begun to talk about features instead, like what something is. Then it kind of grew into or evolved into talking about the benefits or what it does. Then it grew into experience and how you feel about it. And now it's about identification, about who you are. And I'm going to show you a brand that you'll be really, really familiar with and see how this fits for you. And I'm going to show you the evolution of brand with the Coca-Cola or the Coke brand. So this one dates back to 1904, and hopefully you've got a big enough screen and you can see this. It says, delicious and refreshing. Drink Coca-Cola at soda fountains and carbonated in bottles, 5 cents. So it's what it is. It's a delicious and refreshing drink. Then fast forward a few years, and we see now, here's the benefit. It's a pause that refreshes. Fast forward again, and we've got a why. Why should you drink it? Because it opens happiness. You open the bottle, you're opening an emotion, you're opening happiness. It's a why you should drink it. 2017, it's about tasting the feeling. Oh, now we're talking about an integrated why because it's going to affect you emotionally. And then most recently, it started in other countries, but in Canada, it hit here in 2025. It's sharing, it's building community. And I'll tell you, Jody Glenn is a managing editor on this project for EDA. She actually has a Coke bottle on her desk right now that has her name, Jodi. And I exclaimed when I saw it, where did you get that? I didn't know that this was happening. But you can see friend or William. This is about the personal connection. It's about building community. So maybe as you think about your communication and things you might want to do in the magazine or connected to the magazine, just take a look at that brand and how you're thinking about it. And is it connecting and building community? So here's what I've been doing so far. We talked about what we're going to do. We talked about how we're going to do it. I'm going to talk about why. And this actually is what you need to do as you think about communicating all the things that you do, and certainly the why of what you need to do in the magazine if you choose to be in it. So you're going to consider, I'm going to ask you to consider for your own work, the what, the when we get to the why, it's the most important part. So if you consider the why in your organization, that actually is what your organization values. And that's one of the most important things to communicate when you're considering being in a magazine or anything really. If you can get to your why, that will be the most important bit. Okay, so let me just see if I'm on her computer now. Yeah, so here's a company that did why the very best way I've ever seen ever. And I'll tell you a quick story. The one in the center is Alfred Hitchcock. And I spent about 14 months calling the store that had that on their wall. I called them about every week or 10 days and I wore them down and they eventually gave it to me. And I have it now in the hallway leading to my office and I love it. But this is Apple and they understood more than anyone else what the why was. They're selling computers. Do you see a computer here? No. They're talking about how they wanted people to think, and it was to think differently, to think different. It's actually grammatically incorrect, but it still worked. Think different. They're selling computers, but what they were talking about, their why was having people think different. It's really inspirational for me to see this. And if we can just think about your why, that's what I do as well in my business. I think about why. So, what is that? It's about focusing with clarity, consistency, and constancy. I talked about that earlier. You have to have a clear message. You have to say it over and over. That's the consistent part. And you have to keep saying it. It's not a one and done, unfortunately. I would love for things to be one and done, but they're not. People forget. And so you need to tell them over and over. So, what's your story and what is the unique thing that you do? I'll tell you another quick story from Edmonton. He's a realtor. His name is Terry Pranich. Really interesting guy, a realtor, successful realtor. And he made a big deal, I'm going to say maybe 20 years ago. You'd always see him with his hands up like he was cheering like this, yay. And his line was that he did free home evaluations. But you know what? Everybody does free home evaluations, but he made it his deal and he talked about it everywhere, constantly, consistently, and really clearly. It was, I'll do a free home evaluation. So, what's your story and what is your unique or perceived value? It actually doesn't have to be that unique. You just need to keep talking about it. So that's something to think about as you move forward into your why. So then you're going to apply your why to paid, owned, shared, and earned media. So what is that and why do we want to do that? Well, because it amplifies your message. So it's that exponential effect. It also amplifies your budget. So you do the work once and you use it many times. And this is to drive business outcomes because a single thing doesn't. I'm really loving following Sarah Thompson. She's a major media kind of guru. She works for a company called Dentsu. It's a global company. She's works in Canada though. And one of the things she said about a year ago that I really glommed onto that I loved was she said, a click is not a business outcome. And we're going to talk about how measurable things are or how should they be. But regardless, you can create impact through leveraging all four of these in your own organization. And it does take all of them in greater or lesser degrees, depending on who you are and what you do. It's going to be bigger or smaller in each of those areas. Um, and that's good. But we're going to remember that it's not all measurable, and it's okay that you can't measure it. It's a bit of a lie that Google is telling you, or a myth that makes you think that you have to have analytics on everything. You don't. It's really up. It's in their best interest to have you think that. But I'll tell you, they do. I laughed a few years ago because Google does direct mail. So even they do other marketing tactics because they know they work. And you can't measure these exactly. And you're not always going to be able to know what your return on investment is, but you still need that multi-pronged effect, the multi-pronged way of going about talking about your story. Okay, so now I'm the one that's doing this, so I just have to, okay. So let's talk about paid media, and because I want to talk fast because I don't want to run out of time here.
Paid media is what you would imagine it to be. You're paying for it. So these are the ads or the advertorial that you develop or you get your marketing firm to develop and you pay for it directly. Pretty straightforward. So think about these as other types of paid media. You've got radio, billboards, TV, newspaper ads. You'd have paid digital maybe, or paid social ads. These are paid ones where you pay to be someone maybe on someone else's social channel. I mean, we do this with our magazine. People want access to our social followers. We've got a lot, and so people want that. We're very careful about how we do that, but you can get on other people's channels, and it will cost something to be there. It's not just sharing a post. That's paid media. Pretty straightforward. So what is earned media? It is not what people think that I bought ads from you, so I've earned the right to be included in your editorial. No, it does not mean that. It's actually a bad use of the word, and I can't fix it. It's been around for a really long time, but it is media coverage, but you don't pay for it. You don't actually earn it in any way. But the editorial in Invest Alberta or Xperience Alberta is a really good example of this because there is editorial. So you might be able to leverage that when it's about you or it's about something adjacent to you or it's about your area of economic activity or a subject matter. This is third party published information. So there's no money that changes hands. It's kind of just the stroke of luck. Now there are ways that you can kind of make this happen or help potentially have people consider doing it for you. And we're going to talk about that later. Interestingly for me, public relations or PR falls under earned media. And there's been a real rise of PR firms lately, and they are getting in the space more and more. They certainly try to get in the space of journalists, but they can't step in there. Journalists don't want them, quite frankly, because they're always trying to pitch a story a certain way and then they want to see it and so on. Journalism doesn't allow for that. So just like when we're fact checking something or we are writing something, we allow certain people to provide information, but it's not read wholesale before it hits the actual publication. So that's earned. Shared media, now these are social mentions and posts and webinars and the things that you might share information on. Nancy's going to share what I'm saying to you right now, and hopefully I did not swear and you could not hear it when we suddenly had no internet in this building. But this could be a local business, it could be in your region that shares a story. Look for ways to kind of partner on stories. There's ways to do that. It doesn't have to be exactly about what you do. Don't think about so much as the content that is similar or the same. Think of it as the audience is the same. So kind of, think about it in that term. I once had a furniture retailer say to me, "Well, only want to advertise in your consumer magazine when you're writing about furniture." I was like, "No, that's not how it works. You need to do it when the right audience is reading." And in this case, our audience is pretty consistent, but it's the audience of people that have disposable income and care about the design of their home and those things. That's what matters. So a magazine that publishes an article adjacent to a topic or an event that you can tag or share, that, especially if it's digital, that is a really good way to think about shared media. Okay, what's owned media? That's your own website, your blog. It's the stuff you control. Interestingly enough, it doesn't include your social channel. And I'm going to tell you why. Is because once you put it on social, you don't own it anymore. I think sometimes people are aghast when they realize that when you put something that you consider copyright on social, it is not yours. And you need to read the fine print because now Meta owns it or whomever, whichever channel you're using. And that's why they can reshare it. They can pull it into AI and do something with it. It's because you've put it there and you don't own it. And then owned media, and I want you to pay attention to this, it's your internal communication. This is your internal audience. So it could be a staff newsletter. It could be within your own community because changing perception, getting people all moving in the same direction, that starts on the inside. And I think that's something we just assume we're going to send this thing out. Invest Alberta is going to go into Europe, and the Europeans are going to come here and do business with us. Well, maybe, but it's the people in your own sphere of influence. When I say your, I mean whoever you're connected with. That's where the perception is important to change. I'm going to tell you something. I've seen this over and over in my career. Someone's thinking about moving to Edmonton to do business here, and they come here because they're relatives from here, because they talked to someone who pumped up the city. It's stuff like that that is often connected. So the people close to you need to know the story. Perception changes starting from the inside out. Let me just make sure I'm in the right spot here because now I'm a little discombobulated because I'm not where I was. Um, yeah, so it's the combination of these things where you get the exponential effect. If you can figure out a way to have consistency and constancy between paid, earned, shared, and owned, that is the power of a message that will go quite far for you. So I'm going to think about Invest in Alberta, Xperience Alberta. That's actually the combination of at least two. Because if you choose to come in, you're paying for it, you're there, but there's often earned. And I know that great care is taken to make sure that we cover the entire province. So that's, you would have the opportunity to leverage some editorial that's about your region or about your community, or maybe about the category of business that you're in. So you've got at least two already happening here in Invest Alberta, Xperience Alberta. You can have paid and earned. So I want to take this further now, getting a little deeper into the dive. Once you, let's say, write your editorial, and I know a lot of work goes into that, you want to use some of that thinking and some of those words and phrases, not necessarily verbatim, but from your editorial, and do different things with that. So you could use the work you did. You could write a press release. You can send that press release to local publications or other kinds of publications that might be connected to your work or your industry or category of business. You can write an op-ed. So what's an op-ed? It's kind of changed lately just because of newspapers changing. It used to be a short form for saying opposite editorial. And it still kind of is, but it might not be opposite. Like the journal, the Edmonton Journal only kind of gives one page, so it's often on the same page. It's not opposite anymore, but it's an opinion piece. And this would be an opinion piece from someone with subject matter expertise. So if you have someone who wrote the editorial with you or for you that has subject matter expertise, you turn that more into the format of an article and you pitch to get that published in another publication. So that's a really good way to do it. Then you should, if you can, follow some industry news or trade publications that are adjacent or connected in some way to your area of interest. It could be a tourism magazine for the Xperience Alberta side. And then you will pitch a story to them. Now, when you're pitching a story, not an op-ed, you're pitching an actual article. I'll give you some inside story about how to do this. Only send maybe a 2-paragraph memo or a letter to that editor. I'm going to tell you that if you write it and then suggest they publish it, they don't like it. They don't want that. They want to think about this a little bit and they want to think about how they would go about using it. So don't write the whole thing. Just send it as a pitch, 2 paragraphs at most, really tight about why you think it would be of interest to their readers. And it's possible that, like, we don't usually let someone write it unless they're a professional writer. So in our case, we would then take your pitch and assign it to a professional writer or an author and get them to write it. So you get the end result, which is you end up with great editorial in some other publication that's connected to the story that you want to tell, but it's done slightly differently. And there's no cost to that, by the way. Here's a really easy way for you to leverage the magazine. Let's say you're in it, you've got this great ad, you've got some editorial. First of all, take a picture of the cover and say, it's here, it's out, it's available. Promote it that way because you're promoting yourself when you do that. Then take a picture of your ad, and because you shouldn't be just like scanning it and sending it. Show it within the book itself, because the book is what I call a magazine. Show it because you're showing the credibility. We're in this, and show the photograph of the scan, or the photograph of the spread, and post that to social. You're going to want to do this more than once. Then you maybe take a quote. If you're in it, quote yourself, quote someone else who's from the magazine. Just attribute the quote, and you can put that in social. And attributing the quote isn't just copyright, it's because it adds credibility. This is what the mayor said about this. This is what the subject matter person said about this, and push that out in your own channels. Um, the publication is a tool. It really is. It's just a tool that you can use. So how do you do that? You remind, you remind, you remind. So don't just do this in January when it's brand new and it still smells like ink, which I love. Don't just do it then. You've got a ramp of several months to use this as a tool. So you just need to remind people. Don't just say your story once, or push out the image of the magazine once. Do it many times. Just do it maybe from a different angle or a different page, or show your name in it. These kinds of things will still work. People are often driven by the image, so the image shouldn't be the same, but it can just be slightly different. Social media pushes can happen at whatever rate you push things on your social, but do it more than once. The other thing is, you should be mailing copies of this to your contacts, so you have an opportunity to order them. If someone inquires about doing something in your category of business, at your tourist destination, in your town or economic region, make sure they have a copy of that. Ask them, mail it to them, put a note in with it, leverage that. It's pretty exciting to get a magazine in the mail. Open it up and find out that the people that you've been talking to are in that magazine. And then there's all kinds of directed communication, both internal and external, that you can use. And you can pump up the other regions, the other tourist destinations, the other areas that would be connected to you. Because when you share information within your sphere of influence, that sphere of influence shares it back, and you end up with shared media, which is a really powerful part of communication within the area that you have a sphere of influence in. It's kind of, there's that old saying, what goes around comes around. It's actually true. So if you talk about others, they'll talk about you. I really want you to think about the magazine as a leveraging tool. Just use it every which way you can, and there's so many different ways to use it. You want to clearly convey your message and use the magazine as a backup. And don't be afraid to remind, remind, remind. You might be tired of it, but your recipient isn't. Because honestly, the first time they missed it, the second time they weren't paying attention, maybe the third time they caught part of it, the fourth time it's like, oh, I should look at that. The fifth time they're like, yeah, yeah. The sixth time they might take action, and the seventh time you're closing whatever deal you're looking for. And that's if it's seven. Remember earlier on, I said I'm just learning about and getting the research. I'll be receiving that research soon, that because of digital, that people need to see something 22 times. That's a bit scary, but that's the way of our world right now.